So folks, Undead are on the way to Battlegrounds. We are losing quests, but gaining a new minion type and also gaining some new dual type minions as well, much like in standard format. In this video, we're mostly going to be talking about the new Undead stuff, and then I think there will be some more dual type reveals incoming tomorrow, where I'll try to recap those again tomorrow. Now, this video is part review. I'll do my best to break down these cards, but fair warning here, I have not been playing much Battlegrounds. I am not well equipped with knowledge of the meta, how fast people are playing these days, so don't expect a ton of really in-depth analysis in this video. This is more about pointing at the shiny new stuff and saying, oh, that looks cool, or oh, I'm not sure how to use that, and just kind of talking our way through it. That said, this is one of the new tier 6 units in Battlegrounds, Sister Death Whisper, and this introduces some of the reborn synergies we're going to see with Undead minions. So a lot of reborn stuff and a lot of like attack buffing for Undead in particular, resummoning stuff, that sort of thing. And she is a 4/11 Undead, of course, and reads, after a friendly minion is reborn, give your Undead +1/+3 permanently. Now that is not just that minion that's getting reborn, of course. That's all of your Undead on board, and this is a combat buff, but that permanently means those stats are going to stick. So if you have, 4 or 5 things with reborn dying, or perhaps even more, there's gonna be with some ways it looks like to chain reborn effects, then you might be talking about a 5 attack and 15 health buff each time you go through a combat round and survive, which clearly that can be some pretty big scaling, particularly on the health side, and Death Whisper herself has a pretty high health total, which is nice because you're going to need her on board in order for this effect to actually resolve, because it is in combat there. So keeping her around and sticky and protecting her with all this health, and then hopefully scaling off of a bunch of small undead along the way. Now, do keep in mind this card's gonna have a bit of like a diminishing return of sorts in combat, because if a minion is being reborn, that means the front half of it already died, and that front half is the one that belongs to your warband. So you'd be buffing the token that is summoned permanently, but you don't keep that minion permanently, right? So the first death, you might get like 6 real permanent buffs that carry forward, and then the second death, you might get 5, and so on. But still, ultimately, the minions at the end of that train might get 3, 4, 5 buffs or something if a combat goes really well for you, depending on how many reborn things you can get. But not every minion is going to get that full like 5, 15 we talked about. Some might only get 1, 3 or 2, 6, etc., depending on how the deaths actually resolve. So anyway, that sounds really fun. I mean, it's hard to envision a lot of this stuff in practice because you just don't know how many reborn things you're going to get. You don't know how often Death Whisper is going to get sniped off. So some questions for me to answer for sure, but looks really fun. I like the idea of my board is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and crazy high health totals over time. So this card looks really fun. This is the Eternal Summoner. It's a tier 6, 8/1 Undead with Death Rattle summon 2 Eternal Knights. Well, what is that, you might ask? It's basically a Pogo Hopper. This is a 2-mana 4/1 Undead. It has +1/+1 for each Eternal Knight that died this game. So, of course, you can just run these naturally. This appears to be a buyable minion based on the reveals. And then, of course, also you get the extra ones here from the Eternal Summoner. So if you get one of these down early in a game and you start killing off a bunch of Eternal Knights, obviously, at some point, these are going to get pretty dang big throughout the course of a game. And frankly, even if you just buy like 2 of these early in a run, they're going to be like 6/3s and then 8/5s and then so on. They get pretty big pretty fast, assuming they die, which with the lower health total, of course, they're very encouraged to take a big trade and die off in the meantime to feed back into the next one. So this looks really, really fun. Sometimes I do worry about the viability of these things. Is +1/+1 going to be fast enough? Will you be able to get these consistently enough? All of those things are questions that are hard to answer in Battlegrounds yet again. But man, this looks really, really enjoyable. Everybody always loved Pogo Hoppers. I love Pogo Hoppers. I will say, you don't have the ability to give these Divine Shield like Pogo Hoppers. Sometimes it might be harder to create like extra copies and do shenanigans like you could do with Pogo Hoppers perhaps. But nonetheless, really, really nifty mechanic. Excited to try that one out. So moving on here, we have the Colossus of the Sun, a new tier 6, 6/6 Undead with Divine Shield and Reborn. And I know what you're thinking, wait a minute, isn't that just like a slightly bigger Bronze Warden, the 2/1 dragon? And yes, it is just a slightly bigger Bronze Warden, and it may not seem like it's worth it for a tier 6 unit. But number one, Bronze Warden was always pretty good in my recollection. And number two, you know, a +4 attack buff is significant. That's not insignificant, right? Because remember, it's being multiplied by 4 attacks, really. So it's kind of like adding an extra 16 attack across all of those bodies. But beyond that, as we're going to see in the rest of this video, there are a lot of ways to add permanent attack scaling to your undead and even future bots undead. So throughout the course of the game, you might be able to buff a bunch of attacks up as a rest of game style effect. And then the first time you buy a Colossus of the Sun, it might already be pre-buffed up to like 12 attack, 14 attack or something. And then of course, you know, you're talking about a much more meaningful front end on this minion, attacking basically for 14 twice before actually having the reborn, and then the reborn sticking around too. Also will benefit based on the wording of these cards, because it again seems like an aura effect. So 2 more 14 attack Colossuses of the Sun, and suddenly it's like, dang, okay, that thing is really going nuts. That's a lot of bodies taking great trades. So I actually do think this minion will be a pretty important way to cap off an undead attack build, which we'll see some more support cards here for moving forward. Like this one, it's an Ubarak, the Nerubian King, a tier 5, 5/3 undead. Death Rattle, your undead have +2 attack for the rest of the game wherever they are. And because this is a rest of game effect and that wherever they are wording there, I think both myself and RDU, who revealed all these cards, is interpreting that to mean that future undead, both token summons and future purchases, would both benefit from this. So for instance, if you have an Anubarak that's died, you know, 4 or 5 times over multiple combats, there will even be ways to give this card reborn as well, potentially, so you can even double that up. Then you're talking about, you know, +8, +10, so on and so forth attacks throughout the course of the game. So an early Anubarak could really help support things like your Colossus. And of course, any token summons. Every little reborn undead suddenly becomes a lot more powerful when you start adding all of this long-term scaling attack. And it also future-proofs your build as well, which is pretty cool if you get this one early. So all in all, this definitely looks like an important build around piece for undead. And, you know, we've got things that are giving health biases there with the Frost Whisper card, and then this is giving attack biases as well, so they might be counterbalancing each other. But, you know, when you're running a lot of tokens and reborn and stuff like this, often attack is enough. You're spreading it across all those bodies. You don't necessarily need the health if you've got more and more ways to benefit. Think about like a Deathwing build, for instance, right? You like all the tokens. Mechs too kind of do the same thing. You may not need as much health to work with because you've just got all these extra trades. So next up, we've also got the Hungering Abomination, a tier 5 3/4 undead with Avenge, gain +1/+1 permanently. So each time a minion dies in combat while the Hungering Abomination is alive on board, he's going to gain some extra stats there. Again, some token scaling. If you get this guy in golden, of course, too, gaining that +2/+2, you could easily have 5, 6, 8, 10, even 12 plus things dying in a single combat if he's able to stick around until the very end and realize some pretty big buffs every single turn on the Abomination. So this is more of one of those like instant tempo things, is perhaps, you know, a scaler or something you're building around long term, but can really help you get a big carry minion in the mid game if you get into a tier 5 card early with the Hungering Abomination here. So probably help you move your build from early game to late game with something that's big and sturdy, helps you win a combat or two along the way. Moving on here to the Possessive Banshee. This is a tier 4 2/7 undead with a battle cry given undead +2/+7. So she's literally possessing another one of your characters here with her stats, it seems. And yeah, that is a pretty big, pretty different looking sort of Battlegrounds buff. We don't see this a lot, but given there are a few minions you might want to keep alive very specifically, like your Abomination or your sister Death Whisper here, because they have effects where you're looking to keep them alive on board, yeah, sure, giving it an extra 7 health could definitely help it survive into a few trades. Also, just, you know, if you get a big thing that has high attack but needs some health to take some value trades, using the Possessive Banshee to fill in a little bit, solve some of those gaps there on health, makes sense to me. This card's pretty cool. The Handless Forsaken, a tier 4 2/3 undead with Death Rattle, summon a 2/2 hand with Reborn. So that is in total 3 units here, all in the Handless Forsaken, because you get this, You get the front half of the 2/2 and the back half of the 2/2 with reboard, which obviously if you've got all these token, avenge, or scaling undead death type synergies, then boom, the Handless Forsaken is going to be a really important engine to support that. Get this going with your Frost Whisper, with your avenge cards, and you've got lots and lots of extra buffs proccing essentially off of a single unit. So this one alone might not be great on it. You know, it's not doing a lot as a tier 4, but it's feeding really nicely into those other synergies. So just creating some setups and some scaling without necessarily doing a lot all on its own. Although, again, you know, if you've got these attack buffs hitting all of your undead permanently for the rest of the game, if these are coming out as 10 3s and 10 2s and 10 1s, okay, suddenly actually that's a lot of great trades. So this could actually be a great way to just get 3 gigantic trading minions as well in the late game once you've scaled everything up as well. So perhaps both a feeder and maybe even in some cases a reward as well. So this is the Soul Splitter, a tier 4 4/2 with Reborn, and start of combat give a friendly undead Reborn. So there are obviously some key targets you could hit here, like the Anubarak, the Rubian King. Obviously, since this has a death rattle, you're looking to proc extra times. That'd be insane if you hit it with the Soul Splitter. But really, even just like a Handless Forsaken, right? If you have enough board space to resolve all of these different bodies, imagine this getting reborn. Then you've got extra layers of all of these tokens getting resummoned and resummoned, chaining into all those buffs. So clearly this could be something that creates some big opportunities, basically, if you're able to do this. And again, you're not sacrificing much because this is a minion that's also going to benefit from all those different scalings and has tokens itself. So pretty nifty here with the Soul Splitter. Do keep in mind that Reborn is in combat, so that's not a permanent Reborn, but still has benefits, you know, to turn into permanent stats through other mechanisms. Moving on to the Ghoul of the Feast, a tier 3 unit here. The 2/4 undead with Avenge 1 give a friendly minion of each minion type +3 attack. So this is a little different. This is a minion type bonus, so kind of an amalgam style minion here, or menagerie, I guess is really the word I'm looking for. Menagerie style minion. If you're looking for a menagerie build, you need an undead that's helping to create other combat opportunities. This could be the guy. Getting some pretty significant attack buffs mid-combat here. If you have Divine Shields weaved into your build, the Divine Shield Dragon, an Elemental, and Mech, for instance, boy, you could have 3 monstrous minions on the back of the Ghoul of the Feast. Now, do keep in mind that's combat buffs. Those aren't permanent or anything, but shoring up a board, getting some tempo in the mid-game definitely seems possible off the Ghoul of the Feast, especially if you have a few tokens there to support it as well. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of builds dumping this in, even for just 1 or 2 minions to hit, if they're looking for something to do to catch up or keep them going in combat to find a win condition down the road. This is the kind of card as a nice stopgap, I would imagine. So next up here, we have the Jelly Belly. What a fun looking minion. Tier 3, 3/5. After a friendly minion is reborn, gain +3/+3. Notably, this is not a permanent stat gain. This is just in combat. So this one's more about, again, shoring up a board, making sure you can win some combats. This is going to get you through the mid game, perhaps trying to find more permanent scaling solutions that will help you win late game. But this guy won't probably keep up quite as well late, but that's why his buff is so big compared to some of the more permanent buffs we saw with like the tier 5 unit, for instance. But nonetheless, I think if you have a couple good early reborn cards, which we're going to see one in particular, having this guy, you know, get you a free extra 6/6 or 9/9 or something early in the game could go a really long way towards preserving your health and helping you be a little bit more aggressive when it comes to tiering. So I do see a use case for this guy for sure. So next up here is the Lich Doctor. Great name, of course. Tier 3, 3/2 undead with Taunt. And at the start of your turn, give your minions that died last combat +1/+1. So since this is a tavern buff, this one would indeed be a permanent buff, +1/+1 across your entire board. And actually, this doesn't even have to be undead. If you'll note, it just says give your minions that died last combat +1/+1. So might work nicely in an undead deck, but it doesn't actually have to. You can put this in any kind of build that you want. Kind of reminds me almost like of a Spawn of N'Zoth, but one that's setting you up for later as opposed to now. It's kind of paying the buff forward every single turn. And this does have taunt as well, so this would buff itself very often. It does not say your other minions, so this would often die with taunt, get its buff, so it's kind of keeping up as well on board, which is nice. But you could definitely see this being a general use minion a lot of decks like, okay, yeah, I have some gold to float here and I have a lot else going on. I'm just going to buy the Lich Doctor and grab a few buffs along the way. It may not be something you're keeping long term because it may just not hold up well. You may be pivoting out of a lot of the minions that do get buffed by this. But again, as a shore up, as a kind of neutral build option, sure, I think this card will get some grabs. All right, next up is the Scarlet Skull, a tier 2 1/2 undead with Reborn. Hey, that's what we're looking for. Reborn cards to proc all these other Reborn effects. Death Rattle, give a friendly undead +1/+2. So not only some Reborn bodies here to proc stuff, but also a Death Rattle buff there in combat. Again, keep in mind, not a permanent buff, it's a combat buff, but trading up its stats a little bit, just, you know, free little bonus, I think. You really care probably more about the Reborn stuff activating. So, I mean, in total, this is honestly a lot of stats. It's like 4-7 in stats, I guess. Because you got 1-2 and 1-2, and then you got 1-1 and 1-2, which is a lot. But I will say, you know, they're going to be spread across things. It might be hard for these stats to actually make impactful trades or value trades. So I don't know if the stats are actually going to be all that great in the early game. Plus, it's only going to be on other undead specifically, which might be tough. That could help because it could stack all of the stats on a single thing, which could be beneficial for taking trades and building a nice, big, tall, scary thing in any given combat. But at the same time, if you don't have an undead, or if that undead gets sniped early or dies before the second half of this dies and whatever problems you have there, then, you know, it's potentially a lost buff very often as well. So I have a feeling these stats aren't going to feel quite as amazing off of all of these Death Rattle buffs and stuff as you might hope. They might feel a little clunkier. But still, just having all those Reborn bodies can feed and fuel a lot of other things. So this is a card probably people are still going to have to use to get the other stuff moving. So next up here, we have the Nerubian Death Swarmer, a tier 2 1/3 undead battlecry. Give your undead +1 attack for the rest of the game wherever they are. So we're seeing another one of these permanent aura style buffs for your undead, which, as we know, if you got a lot of Reborn stuff, that's going to stack up to lots of additional stats. Now, this is a pretty low tempo play, you know, for a tier 2, you're basically kind of getting a 2/3 here that's mostly setting you up for the future. So it might be hard to take this in the early game when you don't have a lot of gold to work with. You're just trying to preserve your health, get into a good spot in the mid game. I could imagine this being pretty risky. Maybe if you just need undead, you take it because it's all you got and it helps. But it's one of those two, like in the late game is actually going to be worth buying because this +1 attack per 3 gold or 2 gold, I guess, with a sale, really going to be worth it. Probably just depends on how much stuff you have. If you have any other kind of economy manipulation happening that makes that either, or ways to benefit off these battle cries and such. So this card's iffy to me. I feel like this could fall in a little bit of a weird gap where it's just not worth it. I guess it depends on just how many Reborn minions you're getting and how quickly each of these is going to scale up your board, because individually they seem a little underwhelming to me. They're not creating a lot of breakpoints and opportunities. It's really in mass, when you hit that critical mass, that they feel good. After you've played like 5 or 6 of these, yeah, that's really, really significant, but that comes at quite a gold cost. I don't know if people are going to be able to sacrifice that much tempo for that long-term upside, but I kind of hope so. It seems like a cool minion to get a Reborn build going really nicely alongside a new Barak later. So finally, down to the tier 1s here, we've got the Helping Hand, a 2/2 Reborn. Looks awesome. This is exactly the kind of Reborn stuff you're looking to set up. This is good early in the game, as we've seen before. The Taunt Reborn guy was everywhere in Battlegrounds for a while. Of course, that having Taunt was really important, but still, this is a great pile of stats to take trades early in Battlegrounds, and it sets up for later. So it seems like a great core tier 1 minion for Undead. You've also got the Rothhide Knoll, a tier 1 1/4 Undead that has +1 attack for each friendly minion that died this combat. So a little bit of scaling here. Potentially, you know, you get some Reborn down, you get 3 or 4 deaths, and this guy becomes slightly larger as a tier 1, and at 4 health, of course, can take some trades. So yeah, I think good in a pinch early for Undead, but probably not something you can keep around long term. I'm sure you're going to pivot out of this one pretty quickly. And then also here, the Risen Rider, a tier 1 2/1 with Taunt and Reborn. Hey, what do you know? It's like the other guy, the Acolyte of Cthulhu, maybe? I'm not good with Battlegrounds names in particular, but that sounds sort of right at least. But only 1 health here instead of 2 on the front half. But again, just really great way, cheap little dude to force some awkward trades from your opponent, but also just start feeding your reborn synergies. Again, this looks like a great tier 1 option for lots of decks. This is the kind of thing that could hang around or you grab at the end of a shop just to make sure you're feeding into your other plays rather nicely. So also revealed today, we got a new hero, Professor Putricide, with a 4 gold hero power that'll help you craft a custom undead. Basically, that's going to use these undeads, but also undeads from standard format as well, just like a mix of random stuff. So there's going to be things like poisonous in there and so on. If you want to get the details on this, I'm not going to break them all down. Kriparian did a great video all about Professor Putricide. Go watch Krip's video to learn more details, but definitely sounds like a really fun hero. Building a custom undead, like building a Zombeast, looks very, very interesting. And then there were also a couple dual type minions revealed as well, which clearly are going to have some implications for the undead minion type. I'm going to save these for the dual minion type video tomorrow, revealed alongside additional dual type minions. But as you can see here, this is a card that might synergize really nicely with that battle cry, give things +1 attack, help you scale off your battle cries faster. And this, of course, is just another great reborn thing that the reborn version in particular could be really nice with lots of bonus enchantments for beast builds, perhaps extra leapfrogger style plays and so on. So these look both pretty promising as well. So that said, that wraps it up here for our Battlegrounds Undead card review. Really excited to try a few of these things like the Eternal Summoner. Want to see some of these attack scaling things happening. Curious about Sister Death Whisper here. So all in all, I want to hear your guys' thoughts. What cards do you think are really exciting? What's going to be awesome? Especially if you're a Battlegrounds dedicated player who can offer some additional insights on top of me. Very curious to hear those, because I am certainly just a casual Battlegrounds enjoyer these days, but definitely still excited to give all this stuff a whirl. I always like seeing new cards, and in fact, I'd love to see some of this artwork and some of these cards ported over to duels or standard format as well. Always feels like a waste when these things are only in one game, but imagine this guy in duels. I don't know what he'd do, but it'd be really cool. So definitely excited to give these a shot. So thanks so much as always for watching. Thanks for those comments, and until next time, game on.